in everything that
Good morning again, everybody. Thanks for your patience as we let the roads clear a little bit. I understand there was a tree down on 410. No injuries from what I've heard, so that's good, but that delayed some folks. So I think people will still be arriving throughout the morning, but I appreciate everyone who's here right now. Welcome to the third annual Wellspring Conference. I'm Bruce Kendall, the CEO of the Economic Development Board for Tacoma Pierce County. As most of you know, we're in the business recruitment and retention business, but another thing we work on are ways to enhance the key assets in our market that help drive economic growth. Some of these are short-term plays, some of these are long-term plays. I think water technology, clean water innovation falls into both those categories, and we're very excited about this event in its third year. I think everyone I've talked to would agree that our program has gotten better each and every year, and this year is no exception. So thank you all for being here. Thanks to the speakers for agreeing to be an important part of this. But it is an interactive event. There will be plenty of Q&A. We have relatively long breaks to give folks a chance to network as much as possible. So please take advantage of those. You'll notice at 4:30 today, we have an opportunity for kind of mini TED Talks. And you're familiar with TED, I'm sure. We're calling these our lightning talks, and there's a sign-up sheet right outside the door there to your right, where you can sign up for 3 minutes at 4:30. We'll get as many folks in as possible, and it's a chance to reflect on some of the things you've heard today. Maybe you've heard some things you might disagree with, or you want to amplify, or you have a story to tell that relates to something you heard. And this is a chance for us to gather the collective intelligence, if you will, of the group. So think about that. I know we have at least one person signed up at this point who really wants to get the ball rolling for us, so we're excited about that. I want to thank a couple of folks, or a few folks, for helping make this happen. Port Commissioner Connie Bacon, who's in the back of the room, and Kurt Marks, who was one of the key people, along with Jim Parvey and some others, who put together the program, or ran the program committee for this event this year. We really appreciate their hard work. In particular, I want to thank our title sponsors, the City of Tacoma Environmental Services Department, the Russell Family Foundation, and the Port of Tacoma. Why don't we give our title sponsors a round of applause? And earlier, as you were gathering, all of our various sponsors were cycling through the PowerPoint. You can also see their material, or their logos with your program. And then, of course, out in the hallway outside the gathering area, a number of our sponsors have booths set up. So please take advantage of learning what you can and sharing with them. Our morning coffee was sponsored by geoengineers, so we appreciate that. And each break and coffee throughout the day will have a different sponsor, so we appreciate Geo stepping up to be our eye-opening sponsor this morning for coffee. Why are we here? From an economic development perspective, we're shining a light on a world-class innovation cluster that is clean water technology. Whether it's the Center for Urban Waters, WSU Puyallups Research and Extension Center, UWT and the Port of Tacoma, the City of Tacoma's Environmental Services Department, or the Puget Sound Partnership, whether it's geoengineers or Point Ruston and many other companies, we're the center of innovation. We are a center of innovation and expertise that has the world's attention in clean water technology. Great regions compete successfully around the world because they're home to a special blend of talent, interconnected companies, educational institutions, governments, and nonprofit organizations that differentiate them from the pack. Clean water technology and innovation is in Tacoma Pierce County exemplifies these characteristics. These interactions amongst these groups within the cluster increase productivity, accelerate innovation, and stimulate new business formation. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes these are short-term plays, sometimes they're long-term, but we know from experience that the more interactions we have among talented people from a variety of positions within the cluster, the more good ideas can emerge, and that's one of the reasons for this conference, is to generate even more opportunities for folks to interact. We welcome our friends and collaborators from near and far, and we have more folks coming from outside the state this year than ever before, which is fantastic. And we want to use this time to learn together, meet together, and hatch new ideas together. Just 3 years ago, Connie Bacon led the effort that emerged as the Water Partners of Tacoma. That's the umbrella under which we're meeting here today, and thanks to Connie for that. We really appreciate her foresight. The Water Partners of Tacoma is focused on 3 things. First, things like this, spotlighting the great assets we have here in the water technology space. Second, working directly with companies that are in that space to help them expand in this market. And third, generating new investments, companies that might be looking to come into this market for the first time. And we leverage all of these assets you're going to hear about today and others, including the Center for Urban Waters, UWT, Environmental Services at the port and at the city, WSU Puyallup, in our work reaching out around the country and around the world to talk about some of the amazing talent and expertise and science we have going here that might help us attract companies into this marketplace. So that's the economic development perspective for this, and I'm excited about learning a ton from our various panelists and all of you as we interact throughout the next day and a half. This is a day and a half conference. We have an exciting morning for you tomorrow, and encourage everyone who's here now, of course, to continue through tomorrow as well. Without further ado, let me move to introducing our first 2 speakers, Congressman Derek Kilmer and Congressman Denny Heck. I'm going to introduce both of them now, and then Derek will come up first, Congressman Kilmer will come up first, followed by Congressman Heck. Congressman Kilmer brings a special set of skills to this event. For 8 years, he was the Business Retention and Expansion Vice President at the Economic Development Board, where I work. I had the privilege of partnering with him on a lot of projects over many years, while he also established his career in public life in the state legislature. In 2012, he was elected to Congress for the 6th Congressional District in the state of Washington, which is the district we're in right now. So we're in his home district. Derek has a keen ability to work with CEOs, plant managers, white collar, blue collar, and also with regulators, other elected officials up and down the scale. And that's a great talent to have in an economic developer. It's also a great talent to have in a member of Congress. So welcome, Derek, and he'll be up here in a moment. Following him will be Congressman Denny Heck. Denny represents the 10th Congressional District, which is the newest district just created in 2012 in the state of Washington. And by definition, I think he set the definition for hitting the ground running. Congressman Heck has had a storied career in public life and in private life. He founded TVW, the most acclaimed public television programming station in the country, one of the earliest ones, and he also has served in the executive branch as well as in the State House, and now, of course, in the U.S. Congress. He also was elected in 2012 for the first time. And so think about this. We have 20% of our House delegation right here in this room. So a lot of power in the room. And if you look at the whole delegation, includes our senators, that's 16.7% of the entire delegation. So we're very fortunate to have both of them here. Congressman Heck represents the area that includes the WSU Extension facility in Puyallup and has a keen interest in the cleanup of Puget Sound and the good work that is being done across many organizations in this room in terms of clean water technology. So with that, let me ask Congressman Kilmer, and let's welcome him to the podium.
Well, I've never thought of myself as 8.35% of Washington's representation. Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Bruce for the invitation to say a few words, and thanks to the EDB for putting this together. And thanks to all of you for being here. I was given really two directions. One, be brief, and two, be inspiring. And I know when you think of brevity and inspiration these days, you think Congress. No? Okay. Honestly, last night I was thinking about what to say to you, and we're just blocks away from the State History Museum, where they hold in their collections the initial territorial seal. And I was thinking about that last night. On the front of the seal, it shows a sheet of water being traversed by a steamer and a sailing vessel, and then it shows a city in perspective. And then right in the center of the territorial seal is an anchor, and holding the anchor is the goddess of hope. And she's pointing at the word Alki, which is our state's motto. It's a Chinook word that most commonly translates into by and by, but it's also translated as hope for the future. And as we sit here this morning, just miles away from the port and its seafaring vessels, we are seeing the extraordinary intersection of water, this city, and hope. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that intersection. Tacoma and our region are pioneers in demonstrating that being good stewards of our environment and our economy aren't mutually exclusive. Everyone gathered here knows that clean water isn't just essential for health, it's actually contributing to quality jobs and to economic opportunity here in Washington State. As Bruce mentioned, I worked at the Economic Development Board. He slided me 2 years. I worked for a decade at the EDB. And the EDB, speaking of mottos, the EDB has a motto, which is we are competing with everyone, everywhere, every day, forever. If you went to the EDB's annual meeting, you got a pen that said that motto on it. And it's something that now hangs in my office in Washington, D.C., because I think it's actually not just a good adage for economic development, it's a pretty good adage for our country as well. But what excites me about events like this is we are now exerting our competitiveness in new ways. Bruce talked about assets, and I want to talk just briefly about 4 of those assets. One, our natural assets. Take Puget Sound. It is an estuary that supports a complex ecosystem that gives generations of Washingtonians the opportunity to go fish or dig for clams or hike along the shores, and it is a draw for workers and for employers who want recreational experiences. But it's also a part of a thriving marine industry that contributes 148,000 jobs to this region, that contributes $30 billion of revenues to this region, and enables entrepreneurs and local businesses the opportunity to benefit. And frankly, that's part of the reason that Congressman Heck and I are partners in trying to recover this extraordinary natural asset. We formed in Congress something called the Puget Sound Recovery Caucus to try to elevate the sound both from the standpoint of mind share, but also funding share, so that we're getting the resources that we need to restore that extraordinary natural asset. Right now, we've got a natural asset that'll go toe-to-toe with any other in the world. Unfortunately, we are not in this region getting the funding that the Chesapeake and that the Great Lakes are getting to recover that asset, and that's something that Denny and I are working very hard on. So first, we've got our natural assets. Second, one of our assets is that we've actually got some successes under our belt in terms of environmental remediation. This community has an extraordinary history in industry, extraordinary industrial history, but we now also have some successes in cleaning up from that industrial history. From industrial smokestacks and what used to be considered the Tacoma of aroma, we've seen a incredible turnaround. The only smell you have in Tacoma now is success. You have, that finger now points to hope. The Tacoma embraced the Chinese proverb that if we do not change our direction, we're likely to end up where we are headed. So now we're headed someplace different, someplace better. Look at Point Ruston as an example. I think they're one of the sponsors here today. The Cohens have been involved. That was the site of the Asarco smelter, which produced a toxic stew that, made employees sick and turned that site into a Superfund site. And now, on that very site, are waterfront condos and apartments and stores, and the finger there now points to hope. You look at the cleanup of the Thea Fost after 100 years of contamination. The city and the state and others committed more than $100 million to restoring that body of water. Where industrial waste and sewers once dumped into the bay, now the water is restored, and all we have there is hope. So that's an asset. The fact that we've actually, had some successful hits under our belt is an asset for us. Third, you look around this room at the private industry in this room. Some of the great companies that are co-sponsoring this, and some who are just here as participants, whether it be geoengineers or companies that are developing new technologies around clean water, or whether it be consulting firms. We have those as assets in this region. That's a strength. And then the final asset that I want to speak to is the extraordinary effort that's been undertaken around research and development, and specifically related to the Innovation Partnership Zone that this community came together on to form. We are in a highly competitive global market, and research and development matters, particularly with water technologies. This is why I'm absolutely thrilled that at a clean water conference, no less, that I get to announce the next step in Tacoma's evolution, which is the completion of construction of 3 facilities here in Pierce County that will support commercial development of clean water technologies in the South Sound. And when I served in the state Senate, I led a big capital works bill, a big jobs bill, that invested in projects around the state. But among those investments, we focused on innovation partnership zones, including the one here in Pierce County. And I was proud to work with the EDB and educational partners and my friends in the Pierce County legislative delegation to fund some important projects. Those projects include a clean water innovation lab at the University of Washington Tacoma Science Building. Second, an advanced analytical instrumentation effort at the Center for Urban Waters on the Foss Waterway. And third, the Washington State University Puyallup Aquatic Toxicology Lab, which I know Denny will be talking about a bit as well. But these projects, these investments will expand those labs at all 3 sites and will allow private sector scientists and engineers to collaborate with university researchers and with government experts on technology and strategies that are critical to sustainable development into the future. I serve on the House Science Committee, and I've spent time working on technology transfer. In fact, this year the House passed a bipartisan bill that I put forward focused on national labs and bringing them into the 21st century and turning those innovations that occur in our labs into jobs, into private industry. The idea behind technology transfer is to allow an entrepreneur or a startup to harness the research being done in our laboratories. And in this way, scientists and academics can actually solve complex problems more easily through partnership with the private sector, but it also helps revolutionary companies get off their feet and create quality jobs. And I am very, very excited that with these investments, we can foster entrepreneurship and innovation right here in Pierce County. So I guess in closing, I just want to say I am proud that our region is stepping up its game, that we are finding ways to compete in a globally competitive economy that doesn't pit our environment against our economy, where we can actually have water and a city and hope all on the same seal. So with that, it's now my real pleasure to introduce one of my not just partners and colleagues, but one of my good friends, someone who has been at the forefront of innovation for quite some time. Not just innovation within the public sphere, but within the private sphere as well, being involved in technology startups. but someone who's taken that experience to the Congress and has worked on innovation, particularly related to the Puget Sound recovery. You know, one of the real leaders in the Congress on Puget Sound recovery, and someone that I'm proud to consider a partner in those efforts. Please welcome my very good friend and my roommate, Denny Heck.
Well, after all those kind remarks, there'll be no roommate jokes here today. Thank you, Derek. In all sincerity, I will say, all sincerity, there is not a smarter, harder working, or funnier member of the United States Congress than Derek Kilmer. And the people of the 6th District are unbelievably fortunate to have him representing them in Washington, D.C. I want to begin by thanking you. Thank you, Bruce, for your leadership for this today, but also thanks to all of you for what it is that you do, because in a perverse sort of a way, I kind of owe my job to you, right? I mean, it's all the efforts that you were involved in that enable population growth in a planned and appropriate way that preserves our water resource, that caused Washington State to grow, that caused it to have added to it the 10th Congressional District. So thank you. I'll tithe back to all of you for that, I guess. It has been a real privilege and pleasure to be Washington State's first representative from the 10th District, although I alternate between being bemused and being outraged, frankly, in my observation of some of my colleagues in Washington, D.C., who are thrilled with the activity of decrying budget excesses and always seeking to cut the budget, who are first in line back home to cut the ribbons to bring forth new infrastructure investments that will help our community. And I often think about my parents' generation, the greatest generation, and I think about our state's incredible heritage, and, for example, the construction of the Grand Coulee Dam. I frankly don't think anybody, when the Grand Coulee Dam was proposed and being built, said, oh, let's not do this, let's cut the deficit instead and not spend this, what was it, $168 million back then, because they understood what an unbelievable investment in our future it would be, and turned out to be. Laid the foundation for growth here on an unprecedented scale. It's not a stretch of logic to point to the Grand Coulee Dam and all the other hydroelectric projects to cite as it were the origin of our state's growth during a generation or two. Low-cost power equals the construction of aluminum reduction plants equals the expansion of the Boeing Airplane Company. That's it. That's the polemic, and it, frankly, is just about airtight. Nobody complained about, let's not invest this money in the construction of the Grand Coulee Dam. Let's go over here and pay down the deficit. But the truth is, we've got some challenges just like that confronting us now that we ought to get to as it relates to water. The EPA estimates that wastewater utilities need about $200 billion in the next 20 years. That's not a small amount of money. And drinking water needs about $275 billion in the next 10 years. So we got some hard work ahead, and there are going to be tough choices in Congress and in our local municipalities, but we ought to get to them. I want to touch very briefly on 4 things: building water systems to meet modern needs, a new approach to stormwater management, changing the definition of Puget Sound in accordance with some of the references that Derek made. And then lastly, I want to talk about this issue I've been involved in relating to marine diseases, because it's not unrelated to what we're talking about here today. I am, again, very grateful for the privilege to represent the communities I do. It includes the ports of Olympia, the port of Shelton, and part of the port of Tacoma. And while I'm at that, I just have to do this. Connie, where did you go? Connie? Not in the room? Connie left the room. Connie Bacon was here earlier, and I want to give a shout out to the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Seattle. This alliance, which they recently announced, was an unbelievable feat of statecraft. This is very hard work, and anybody who suggests otherwise does not understand the decades and decades of cultural issues that they had to get past for the benefit of our entire region. And every single member of the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma deserves our appreciation. Their hard work is not done. There's a lot ahead of them. But I am here to tell you that that was a giant step forward in advance. Is that? There she is. Give it up for Connie Bacon and the Port of Tacoma. Connie, I was just going on and I could use my entire time to brag on you for the good work you and your colleagues have done. We should all be genuinely appreciative. That was hard. That was very, very hard. Well, as it relates to ports, one of the issues that we've been dealing with in the Congress, and I am pleased that it was one of the few successes we had this past June, was to pass WRDA. Most of you are familiar with that, the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. That wasn't easy either on a scale compared to what Connie's done. It was this much of an effort, but we funded a lot of water infrastructure projects for the Army Corps of Engineers. And again, like all of these things, it was a balance. We had to leave behind some projects that could not be afforded and that perhaps were outdated so that we could take a step forward. And within that bill, we took a particular step forward in an innovative program called WIFIA, which stands for Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. Included in it, in the WRDA bill, is an opportunity to provide low-cost loans to municipalities and ports so that they can implement some water infrastructure projects. We've been long after that, and it was a good feature, and we'll be watching it closely because I think it will prove itself in a fairly short period of time. Also, we are at work, but not yet at conclusion, of tackling this issue of stormwater runoff. Now, my bias is pretty straightforward. There are a lot of issues related to the Puget Sound, but I think the biggest is stormwater runoff, and it's going to continue to be one of the bigger issues, frankly, as our region continues to grow, which it will because our quality of life is so high. And frankly, that's why I was pleased to co-sponsor the Innovative Stormwater Infrastructure Act, which, among other things, will create some centers of excellence. And I have in mind not only the urban center here in Tacoma, but also that spectacular facility out in Puyallup. Dr. Stark, where did you go? Most of you probably don't know this, but you need to. The largest stormwater runoff research lab in the United States of America is what Dr. Stark directs at Washington State University Extension Center, Puyallup. Did you know that? The largest in the United States of America. They're doing more robust, muscular work on how to improve our management of stormwater runoff than any other private or public facility in the United States. And trying to figure out ways to do this cost effectively and from a standpoint of innovation. And I'm hopeful that there will be considerable benefits come to our region should we be able to pass the legislation, not the least of which is job growth, because let's face it, all of our efforts here go hand in hand with not just a healthy Puget Sound and healthy stormwater runoff systems, but a healthy economy. Derek kindly mentioned our efforts, our joint efforts, and the establishment of the Puget Sound Recovery Caucus. Those continue apace. We should all remember a couple of things. First of all, we actually are still degrading. I don't know if you knew that. It's hard to keep that in mind because the truth is when we are boating out there or we look out there, it looks pretty spectacular. It is iconic for our region, but we're still degrading. We're moving forward in some regards, but as it were, and I don't mean this literally or mathematically, for every step forward, we're still taking a step and a half backwards. We have a lot of work left to do. One of the most important things we can do is get the Puget Sound designated under the Clean Water Act, because as the second largest estuary in the country, it's got a lot of work. 80% of the historic tidal wetlands, which were the natural flushing system, have been lost. 81% of the historic tidal wetlands for the Puget Sound have been lost. So we have a lot of work to do. And it's going to take some money. And one of the quickest ways to assure that we can get it money is to give it what we call program status, designation under the Clean Water Act. Derek and I co-hosted Gina McCarthy, the director of the Environmental Protection Agency here a few months ago, and I was thrilled to hear come out of her mouth the words at the post-session press conference, Puget Sound deserves every bit as much priority as Chesapeake Bay and the Great Lakes. That's our objective, and it's important. And it's been a tough battle. We once had $50 million appropriated to help with projects to do this. That declined to $20 million. Derek and I and our state senators and other members of the delegation were able to increase that somewhat, but it is a battle in a tough fiscal environment. So let me wrap up by just talking briefly about starfish. When you were a child, if you grew up in the Northwest, you undoubtedly would go to the beach and walk in the sand in your bare feet and look for the starfish. It's a vivid memory from my childhood that I couldn't forget if I tried to. Technically, they're called sea stars. And most of you are aware that on the West Coast and in the Northwest in particular, they're dying off at an alarming rate. 20 subspecies of sea stars are dying off, and we frankly don't know why. The problem is, from a federal government response standpoint, that unlike wildlife on land, unlike marine mammals, we literally have no structure for rapid response. I'm talking about protocols and standards for coordination between agencies. I'm not even talking about increasing the appropriation levels to attack the research on this. We have no coordination protocols or standards. And so Derek and I have introduced legislation that would provide that. And why is that important? Why does it relate to all this other work that relates to development? Well, there is a term called keystone species. Think of it as canary in the mine. Interestingly enough, that's a term of art used in marine science, and it was coined by Dr. Payne from the University of Washington almost 50 years ago to indicate a species whose relationship in the ecosystem was significantly important, that it represented more than its very life. It represented the health of the system. And so we need in place some kind of a system to be able to respond to that. Lastly, let me just remind everybody here that which you already know. Water is crucially important to the health of our economy. There really is no doubt about that. Let me use a local example that's frankly a little bit scary. Most of the time I talk about the impact on the shellfish, the all-important shellfish industry to South Puget Sound and other parts of the Sound, frankly, as it relates to what's happening to ocean acidification. But let me use another one. Some of the best candy in the world is made in Derek's district, Almond Roca. Now, the company happens to be headquartered in the 10th Congressional District, so we share advocacy of this company. They get 100% of their almonds from California, because virtually all the almonds that are available are from California. The drought in California threatens the availability of almonds. This local icon that has been here now over 100 years, I think, has its signature product at severe risk due to a drought in California. So the provision of water and clean water is not an abstract or esoteric or theoretical proposition. It is absolutely something that fundamentally affects the health of our economy. And it is why, frankly, I am so very, very grateful that you would take the time to meet here together to deal with this, and for all the work that you do in the course of your professional lives. I thank you for the privilege of being here.
Thank you, Congressman Heck, Congressman Kilmer. As everyone here can see and hear, we have committed, effective leadership at the highest levels representing us in Washington, D.C., and down to the good work that's being done on the street level and the waterfront level right here in Pierce County. It takes all of us, and we do appreciate their commitment and follow-through. Both of them were able to give examples of specific things that they led or co-led that have enabled all of us to do what we're trying to do, which is make sure that the water systems, fresh and saltwater systems in this state, and frankly around the world, but starting right here, are as clean and available to us for both recreational and economic uses and frankly for preservation for the future generations. And it takes that kind of commitment at a very high level. Having worked in Washington D.C. in a previous life, I can tell you that there's a million things members of Congress can choose to work on, and they do choose to work on certain things and not other things. And I think we're fortunate that both of these congressmen have decided to focus on water and clean water in particular. So thanks to them again. It's now my pleasure to introduce our morning keynote. Many of you know Jeff Lape. He's the Deputy Director of the Office of Science to Technology in the Office of Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. He helps lead water quality criteria development, sets standards for implementation and development of technology-based innovations, and works to promote technology in the clean water and safe water areas. Please join me in welcoming our morning keynote, Jeff Lape.
Thank you, Bruce. Good morning, all. Sorry, I was waiting for that Tacoma welcome. It is such a treat to be here. Let me first thank Ben Grumbles, who was one of your speakers last year, and Connie Bacon for inviting me out. I am so excited about the work that you're doing here in Tacoma. I'm going to try to emphasize some of the points made by Congressman Heck and Congressman Kilner. It's very exciting to see what you're doing. I have a habit of sort of giving away the punchline of my talk early on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Get it right out there and then give you a little more details and maybe justification. The world of water is changing. You're seeing it. There's greater awareness and appreciation for this valued resource. Collaboration and partnerships like what you are doing here in the greater Tacoma area are making a difference. There's a recognition that innovation and technology can help us solve water problems. There's a recognition of the economic value of water. It's so exciting to hear your Economic Development Board embracing water as a fundamental business pursuit. Of course, there's some bad reasons that water is changing. We have water crises driving change. The Congressman's remark about California drought and its potential impact on almonds is just one of many examples. Achieving water sustainability is going to require great change, and we're a sector that, by and large, finds it very difficult to change. And lastly, again, the Congressman's point, we are still degrading. We have made a lot of positive progress, and I speak to this point and reinforce the Congressman's point from my vantage of leading the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort for about 4 years. We took many great steps, and as the Congressman said, we'd take steps forward, but frankly, because of population growth, development, inability to deal with issues like stormwater in a very dramatic way, means that water quality is still degrading, despite all of our good work. So we have lots to do. What I'd like to do this morning is share with you some ideas about change and innovation, give you a flavor for what some pioneers are doing, like you, across the countryside, and hopefully inspire you to keep pursuing your vision of a Tacoma and a waterfront that achieves water sustainability. So I'm going to start with my personal story of where I grew up. It's going to sound a little bit like those of you who grew up here on Commencement Bay. I grew up on the Hudson River in upstate New York. 30 miles north of where I grew up, if I took you there and I had a picture of it, you'd say, my, there is a pristine mountain stream. 30 miles later, by the time it hit my hometown of Glens Falls, Hudson Falls, and Fort Edward, it had been assaulted by paper mills, cement plants, paint manufacturers, electronic components, resulting today in it being designated as a Superfund site. So with a lot of hard work, there has been a lot of positive improvement. But I think as you've seen here in the Portland area and where we've seen across the country, We have a legacy, a century or two-century record of not protecting our water resources. So that is part of our challenge in terms of changing the psyche of the American public to water being a waste disposal site to one that is valued and prospers economic and social growth. I would just point to you the upper left-hand photo. We'll come back to that photo a little later in the presentation. That is the iconic Cuyahoga River that caught fire several times due to industrial pollution. And that probably was one of the many hallmarks of what generated the impetus to the Federal Water Pollution Control Act in the 70s that helped get us many of the improvements we have today. So I'm going to frame technology innovation in the context of a document that EPA has put together. You've got a one-pager about it in your handouts. We basically have tried to demonstrate that EPA fully supports innovation and technology in the water sphere. This is a short document. It's about 20 pages long. And I think what it does most strikingly is identify opportunities, market opportunities, economic opportunities to solve water problems. Certainly, we make the business case. It's not hard to make the business case that we have a water problem, whether it's drought, flooding, pollution, extreme weather events. We simply need a greater suite of tools, strategies, approaches, collaborations to figure out how to solve this water problem. So I'm going to walk through very quickly with you each of the 10 market opportunities, as we call them, for water technology and innovation. Some of them you have been pursuing here in the Tacoma area. Others are particularly unique and germane to other geographies. As we go forward, I'm going to go back for a sec. I want to set the stage, and you've got to put your creative hat on for me here. So we're going to try to think differently about water. But first, we have to begin to think differently on a broader scale. Bruce, I think you mentioned TED Talks this morning. I've got to share with you my favorite TED Talk. It's by Sir Kenneth Robinson. If you want to watch the best TED Talk ever, just Google TED Talk Ken Robinson. It's about 20 minutes. It is the very best, and I think even YouTube and Google say, yep, it's the highest rated. And what Ken Robinson talks about is the importance of creativity. And the creativity particularly he talks about in the education arena. And he gives an example of a little girl in elementary school who has very great difficulty paying attention, and her teachers are very concerned. But one day in art class, she is intensely focused, very deliberately drawing away. And the art teacher comes over and says, "So what are you drawing?" She says, "I'm drawing a picture of God." Teacher says, "Well, no one knows what God looks like." And the young girl says, "They will in a minute." So he uses that great metaphor as an example of, as we think about creativity, as we think about innovation, sometimes we have to expand our minds a bit. So I think it's appropriate to begin with some visionary leaders, some quotes about the future to help us expand our minds. So Lord Kelvin long ago said, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Thank God they're not, or I wouldn't have gotten here. Television won't be able to hold on to a market. People won't sit in front of a plywood box. Maybe there's a world market for 5 computers. The chairman of IBM said in 1943. Ken Olsen, chairman of DEC, said, there is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. So, the last one, our commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office in 1899 said, everything that can be invented has already been invented. So it's sometimes hard to think, if you will, outside the box, but let's try to do that. So again, I'm going to dance through these market opportunities where water problems can be solved. The first one relates to water and energy. All of our water infrastructure in this country uses about 2% of the nation's electricity. That doesn't sound like a lot until you're the municipal water or wastewater guy who has to write probably the single largest utility bill to run their wastewater treatment plant or water treatment plant. Imagine if we could capture the chemical, biological, and physical energy that exists in water and produce electricity. Cool. East Bay Municipal Utility District in Oakland, California has done just that. They've used their excess digester capacity, and they are generating more electricity than they use at the wastewater treatment plant. I guess I want to go back and just give you another wonderful example. It's easy to talk about and think about this in the water sector. Let's apply agriculture here. There's a dairy farm in Lancaster County, not Lancaster County, Ohio, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Luke Brubaker. He's got an 800-head dairy farm. He built a simple anaerobic digester for all of his cow manure. He accepted some of the food waste from 2 local universities with admittedly support, economic development support. He installed a pretty sizable generator, and he produces enough electricity to power about 200 homes. And then he takes the waste solids from that digestion, dries it with the waste heat from the generator, and uses that for cow comfort, his bedding, so he doesn't have to buy sand or straw. Oh my God, how the world can change. So recovering nutrients. Nitrogen and phosphorus are a challenge in virtually all of our waterways. What if we could extract nitrogen and phosphorus from our waste streams and use them as marketable products? Hampton Roads Sanitation District and Clean Water Services up in Hillsboro, Oregon are doing just that. Improving and greening our water infrastructure. Remember the days as engineers when the way we dealt with stormwater was we cleared the land, compacted it, put in curbs and gutters, and got that water off the site as quick as possible. And then, the revelation occurred. No, we should try to capture some of that flow, and we built the first BMP called the Big Muddy Pond and said, there's the solution. No. That's not it either. I think, and I suggest to you, we are just on the cusp of thinking about how green infrastructure can fundamentally transform the look and feel of our urban centers and protect water resources. And we've just scratched the surface of how green infrastructure can do that. Conserving and eventually reusing water. I'm going to describe this one in a tale of 2 cities. Brownwood and Wichita Falls, Texas. Brownwood, Texas has 3 reservoirs for their domestic water supply. One reservoir is at 17% capacity, the other 2 are at 2% capacity. They have a water problem. Wichita Falls, basically, within a year, they will be completely without water. Their solution, bold, driven by crisis, driven by technology. Wichita Falls built a 12-mile pipeline. From where to where? From the wastewater treatment plant to the drinking water plant. Out of necessity. Out of crisis, we're having to apply innovation and technology. Water reuse is we're fundamentally going to have to figure out how to better use the water we have. Monitoring. We know so little about our surface waters and groundwaters. There's a hope for new technology in terms of sensors and watershed-based monitoring networks and information networks to solve that problem. But that's going to mean bringing lots of people together who are already collecting data and who have an interest in collecting data to come together and build these networks. We have something on the order of 250 million people served by 50,000 drinking water supplies in this country. 80% of those drinking water systems serve populations under 3,000 people. So they are, for the most part, the majority of them are very small systems serving very small populations. Technology can help us figure out how to improve the reliability and continued sustainability of these systems. We're a country dependent on energy, and energy uses lots of water. So again, technology and innovation can help us figure out how, in the case of, say, fracking, how the water used to frack a well, 3 to 5 to 10 million gallons of water, can be reused and recycled in a way that it does not have to be discharged. And in the case of Lyndon Roselle Sewer Authority, they are collaborating with a local power authority in terms of water reuse. Climate change. Perhaps some people believe, no, climate change is not happening, but that damn weather is getting really nasty, isn't it? Big swings of rainfall events, drought. It may not be climate change, but the climate is still changing. So we've got to figure out whether in response to things like Hurricane Ivan in Florida or Superstorm Sandy in the Northeast, how we better prepare our communities and our water and wastewater infrastructure to these events. Worldwide and still in this country, we have people who do not enjoy the benefits of basic water and sanitation. There's hope that we can build a toilet that doesn't use 1 to 4 gallons of water every time you flush. So we are hopeful that with help from, for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that we can design a better mousetrap, or in this case, design a better toilet. Lastly, and part of your mission and both congressmen's responses earlier was we have to figure out how to preserve our precious resources. Places like the Great Lakes, Chesapeake Bay, and Puget Sound deserve very special attention and progress. We need to think bold and think differently about how we're going to improve these resources. Just this innovation highlight that's kind of cool is that the University of Virginia developed a game, a very interactive game to help people, not experts like us, but people understand the trade-offs, understand the decisions that have to be made about improving water quality. It also helps that the fellow standing there is Philippe Cousteau, and it's always nice to have someone, the grandson of Jacques Cousteau, helping to promote protection of water resources. And then in our blueprint, we say those are all wonderful 10 market opportunities. Nirvana is putting them all together, achieving them all, and that might begin to look like a water sustainable future. Our blueprint also highlights some of the things that we as an agency are trying to do, particularly in cooperation with our states. Tomorrow we're going to have a session on kryptonite and coffee. Do regulations help or hinder innovation and technology? You'll see that there's a piece in our blueprint called Creating the Regulatory Space, really getting at that central theme of how we can support technology innovation. I'm so thrilled that you guys got Administrator Gina McCarthy, Ellen Galinsky, and more recently Dennis McLaren, the RA, here to see the great work you're doing. That's very cool. Sally is going to talk tomorrow about the innovation clusters. Sally and I refer to us as the chief innovation cheerleaders for EPA. So we're trying to help figure out, help support you achieve the water sustainability goals that you're looking for. I do want to give you a plug to look at a recently released document by the Johnson Foundation at WingSpread. For the past 5 or 6 years, the Johnson Foundation has sponsored dialogues, about 8 of them, on topics such as infrastructure, climate change, and they have put together a synopsis report. They brought in, over the course of these years, 600 experts from across the country to imagine a future for water. And their report, their capstone report, was just released last week. And I think it parallels some of the thinking that you guys are describing. Optimizing availability of existing water supplies, imagining what the next generation of water and wastewater systems look like. The congressman talked about the intense infrastructure need we had, $200 billion for water and $200 billion for wastewater. perhaps we need to rethink how that infrastructure looks in the future. Maybe it's not going to be quite what we've designed it to be in the past. The notion of integrating considerations of water, energy, and food, they're just interrelated. They cannot be separated. The almond example is a great example of that. We need to continue to institutionalize the value of water. So imagine there's a third or fourth one here. How much did these 2 bottles or these 3 bottles cost if I went out to the local market? $2 or $3. That's what I pay for 1,000 gallons of tap water at my home. How can that be? How can I be willing to pay $3 for 3 bottles, yet only pay $3 for 1,000 gallons that come out of the tap in my house? Doesn't make sense. So somehow we've got to help people understand, and I should have looked before. So is Aquafina just filtered municipal water? We'll look after. And something that I think you're doing, and perhaps the Johnson Foundation framed this, they could have framed this different ways. They called it Create Integrated Utilities. But the description of what they talk about is about collaboration and partnerships. Really bringing the whole of a community together to figure out, what do we value? What do we want to achieve in the long term? What is sustainability? So, in semi-closing, I was struck, as Kurt Marks and others, I just want to say thank you for all the wonderful materials you got me in advance. But I was absolutely struck by there you are, all the great things that you're doing oriented on vision, commitment, local leadership, partnership, willing to make the tough decision, bringing resources to the table, demonstrating the economic value of water, demonstrating to folks that a clean environment and a strong economy go hand in hand. And to achieve long-term water sustainability, we really need to address all of the issues of quality and quantity and climate change. So I'm going to leave you with better inspirations of change, more positive views of how we frame the future. I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones. Learning and innovation go hand in hand. The arrogance of success is to think what you did yesterday will be sufficient for tomorrow. And of course, then there's the great management guru, Wayne Gretzky, who said you miss 100% of the shots you never take. And finishing with Michelangelo, a really current day kind of guy. The greatest danger for most of us is not that our aim is too high and we miss it, but it's too low and we reach it. So I leave you with sort of some stunning examples of what the new water infrastructure, the new water sustainability might look like. By the way, the bottom left picture is of the Cuyahoga River, the one that caught fire in the 50s and 60s. So thank you for having me, and best of luck on your endeavors here in the Tacoma area. Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. And so the table's been set. Appreciate that very much, both the two congressmen and Jeff's opening keynote. We're now going to move to our first panel, and this is where things get interactive. The panelists will make short presentations, and then there's plenty of time for Q&A. We have some roving mics. What I'm going to do is introduce the moderator for the panel, and then he is going to assemble his panel up here, and they may introduce themselves or he may introduce them. They've worked this out themselves. This is our 9:15 panel, Water Utilities Preparing for an Uncertain Future. The moderator is Darren Johnson, who I met for the first time just this morning. Darren is president of BIS Consulting. He's also the director of the asset management practices at that firm. His experience includes risk analysis, capital planning, and life cycle analysis for electric transmission, the energy side, water and wastewater, and hydroelectric generation facilities. So let me invite Darren up here, and he'll get his panel organized. Thank you.
Let's not waste a lot of time. Why don't you guys come on up and we'll jump into it here. Bruce is going first, right? Okay. So yeah. That'd be great. Yeah, that'd be great. Our first speaker is named Bruce Flory. I saw him earlier, although, oh, there he is. How you doing, Bruce? Bruce is an economist at Seattle Public Utilities, began in water conservation pilot programs, and since he's been working on rate design and demand forecasting, as well as benefit cost analysis for capital projects. We've worked together on that a couple of times. He served on a number of intergovernmental committees related to growth, climate change, and reclaimed water, and he's a good economist and a good guy. So let's hear what he has to say.
Hi. Well, I thank you very much for having me here. I loved hearing Jeff just now, and he was talking about all the ways that the water world is changing, and I'm just going to try to talk about one of the ways that it's changing. A lot of water utilities in the region and around the country are finding themselves in a bit of a fix. The aging infrastructure, all the costs that were referred to that utilities are looking at, but not enough revenue. In their most recent survey of about 400 utilities, Black and Veatch found that about 2/3 of them have trouble generating the revenue to cover all their costs, often leading to deferred maintenance and insufficient capital spending. And then having to continually increase their rates was among their top sustainability concerns of the utilities surveyed. So why does it seem to be getting much harder than it used to be to raise the needed revenue for all the challenges that are facing utilities now? What's going on? And so I'm going to try to answer that question. I'll start with kind of a general description of how things have changed, followed by an example of Seattle's experience, and this will raise the question of what I call the conservation conundrum. And if that's it, then what else, perhaps? So I'll start with the basic equation. Now, this is a bit of an oversimplification. Most utilities also have a monthly fixed charge along with their volume rate. But this will capture the essence of what's going on. So the average rate just equals cost divided by consumption. So this graph shows the relationship between cost and consumption in four periods. In the first period, both consumption and costs are growing, but consumption is growing faster than costs. And in this period, average rates will actually be going down, even though costs are going up. In the next period, both costs and consumption are increasing, but at the same rate. And in this situation, average rate would be constant. And then in the third scenario, consumption I've split into actually two. Consumption slows and then flattens off while costs continue to increase. And then you start to see some increase in your rates. And at the point that consumption is flat, rates are increasing at the same rate as costs. And then the last period, we have falling consumption as costs increase. This is where we find ourselves now. And so with consumption coming down, rates can seem to skyrocket. If you were the finance director going to, ask for a rate increase, which world would you rather be in? Probably not the last one, but that's where a lot of utilities find themselves now. The red triangle would just show that depending on your rate structure, your cost might increase quite as fast as it was all volume rates, but you'd be somewhere in that range. So this is Seattle's consumption since 1930, and you can see about the same pattern as in that previous graph. So even while population has continued to increase, about 1990 our consumption began to fall. That's the inflection point, and they're now sort of disconnected. Once had somebody ask me, if population keeps rising, will you ever reach zero consumption? I'll come back to that. And it's not just Seattle. So this is something that the Massachusetts Water Resource Authority put together. It's all indexed to 100, and it shows water consumption since 1985 for all these cities around the country. The blue lines, if you kind of squint your eyes, you can just see that all the patterns are going down, and all of them are seeing declining per capita consumption. The gray lines are total consumption, and even about 3/4 of those, at least in recent years, are also seeing that consumption is falling. The cities in the Northwest have some of the fastest or the steepest declines in water consumption. This is our situation in Seattle. While real cost, that's even adjusting for inflation, our costs have increased by about 4 times since 1983. Meanwhile, our consumption has been falling at about at over 1% a year, compared to costs increasing about 4% a year. Now, how come the costs are going up so fast? Well, I'm not going to read through all these, but we've been doing a lot to improve our system, improve water quality, improve reliability, and in managing the system. None of these are really a function of the amount of water that we sell, so they're sort of fixed costs, and they're there if we sell more or less water. So this shows the increase in our average rates in real dollars, so this is after taking inflation out, over the last 30 years. And our rates have more than quintupled in that time. Seems pretty steep. However, some of that is due to the fact that consumption has been declining. As a matter of fact, almost half of it. So if per capita consumption, that is, if people were using the same amount of water, and so the only growth in consumption was because population was increasing, our rates would have only increased from $1.22 to $3.49. That's still something, but much less than it has. And so the impact of conservation and reducing our total consumption has been, that rates have risen. You've all seen the headlines when this happens. This is Portland about a year ago, and using less water gets blamed for the rates, and the politicians or the board. This is a really tough issue when there are a lot of new projects and responsibilities, regulations that have to be met. So, the conservation conundrum, and we have been successful in getting our customers to be more efficient and use less water. They've done what we asked them, and then they say, and and now you raise your rates. So what is going on? Why did we even do this? Well, I'll tell you. Once again, this is Seattle's demand up through 1990. And if things had continued to go as they had, that would have been how our demand would have continued. This was a problem because we only had a certain amount of supply, and we were pretty much up to it, bumping up against our supply capacity in 1990. So Seattle did a whole lot of things to reduce water use because conservation was both faster and had a lot of advantages over trying to build new supply. And you can see the drop. That's what actually happened. And then our current forecast with conservation. So the benefit of conservation was it gave us another 70 years of supply with our existing supplies. If we hadn't have done that, new supply, and those are actually the increments of supply that we would have had to have added at a cost of probably 10 times the cost of conservation. So I guess I'm saying, it's true that when the denominator in that equation changes and rates or cost divided by consumption rates do go up, but people's bills have gone down. You have to look at what would have happened if you hadn't done conservation, and everybody would be paying more. They'd be using more water, but their total bills would be higher than they are now. So my conclusion is, don't blame cost-effective conservation for the financial problems that we're running into now. Because, as I said, if we had not reduced our consumption, we would be paying more because we would have had to make this huge investment in new supply. However, even though we're not blaming conservation, we have to take it into account, and this is something that often gets lost. If you don't anticipate continued conservation in your forecast for rate design, you will always find yourself not recovering the revenue that you need. Also, the rate structure, when conservation was our top priority, we also changed our rate structure to provide a price signal, and this involved reducing the size of the fixed charge, having inclined block rates, but that also makes revenue more sensitive to the vagaries of demand going up and down. And then there's also what I call the politics of rapidly rising rates, and that is just, if you think back to that newspaper article, that's the story that always gets told, is that we reduced our consumption and rates are going through the roof, and so we need to convince these people. And I would suggest the way to do that is to concentrate on the bills and not the rates. So the story has to be told that yes, rates are higher, but people are using less water, and bills is the important metric rather than just concentrating on rates. Let's see, was there anything else I wanted to? And I think that's where I'll end it. I thank you very much.
All right, we'll have time for questions at the end. Thanks, Bruce. Our next speaker is Sean Seneschal, and he's the manager of rates and financial planning for Tacoma Water. His group is responsible for managing risk through the development of financial plans and rate forecasts, managing debt, forecasting demand, and managing special contracts. He's got 8 years of experience in government finance and rate development. All right, Sean.
Thank you, Darren. I'm Sean Seneschal. I work for Tacoma Water. It's my first Wellspring conference, so it's great to be out here. This is in our backyard, and it's great to have Bruce and Ed with me today to kind of underscore what I think has become a regional issue on the water front. But first, I want to say that the last time I saw Ed, he had a beard, and I grew one coming to this conference thinking that I couldn't be taken seriously as an economist, so I didn't have one. So he really threw me for a loop today when he showed up clean shaven. So, like Seattle Public Utilities and Cascade Water Alliance, Tacoma Water is a regional utility. We serve the city of Tacoma, but also well beyond that, we serve University Place, unincorporated Pierce County, and a number of wholesale utilities and partners along the way of our transmission mains. We get most of our water from the Green River watershed over to the right of this map, and we carry that water into town via 2 large transmission lines that actually pass through a number of different utilities that we serve in a retail capacity or wholesale. We directly serve about 320,000 people in Pierce and King counties. We have a significant commercial and industrial base, particularly in the Tide Flats area of Tacoma and down south in the Frederickson area of Pierce County. But we also provide service through wholesale and partnership arrangements, as I mentioned, that extends our service to almost 1 million additional people. We're a AA rated utility, and we were purchased by the city of Tacoma back in 1893, along with the power utility for less than $2 million. Today, just the water utility alone holds over $1 billion in assets. And the reason I mention that is that it really serves to define the economics of our business. We're very capital intensive, and that means that our costs, regardless of whether we're producing water or not, are largely fixed. They're mostly driven by infrastructure, and when we step back and look at our operating expenses on a year-to-year basis, we spend 96% of our costs through fixed costs. The only costs that go away if folks stopped using water tomorrow would be about 4% of them. And in addition to that, our water's capital intensive. Our industry is capital intensive. Infrastructure lasts a long time. So the infrastructure that we build can last anywhere from 50 to 200 years, and the decisions that we make around water sometimes last forever. So our decision-making horizons must be long as a result. And so together with Cascade and Seattle, the utilities that are represented here today, we manage nearly $3 billion in total assets, and we've built them over the course of time based on expectations about future demands. And as you can see, our future has changed a few times over the past 60 years. The red line is our actual historical demand, and off of that red line, you can see all of these lines branching off that represent, at a point in time, our demand forecasts going forward into the future. Along the way, we were procuring additional supply, building out our system to make sure we could develop and deliver demands to the region well into the future. And then demands ended up changing, as Bruce just described for Seattle. And what we ended up with is a system that has nearly twice the capacity as what we delivered last year. So demands that were once climbing in step with population have changed their trajectory, and have actually been declining. And here's part of the reason why. This chart shows Tacoma's steadily growing, slowly growing population in this region. And it also shows from early 2000s to today, declining per capita demand. At the beginning of this decade, in about the year 2000, we were using over 90 gallons per day per person, and today we're using less than 70. So just in the last 15 years, there's been a real shift in how folks are using water at the residential level. Combine this with the loss of heavy industry and industrial investment in water-efficient process, and you've got what is a really changed demand landscape. Meantime, our costs continue to go up. In any industry, we always know that our costs are going to increase by roughly inflation year after year after year. What sets the utility industry apart from others is that we're highly sensitive to regulatory requirements. And so over the past 10 years, you can see the compounding pressure that we've seen on the cost front as we've complied with regulatory standards, particularly in the covering of all of our reservoirs and the construction of the Green River filtration facility. And when you pull it all together, what does it mean for our customers? Clearly, even though customers may be using less and less water over time, they're paying more and more through their utility bills. And when you adjust the bill increases for inflation, it doesn't look quite as bad as it did before, but costs are still rising, and there is significant financial pressure that we need to cope with and find a way to adapt to in a changing demand landscape. So really, what does it mean for the future of our business, and what kind of stance we take going forward? Well, first, we need to continue to do things that we've done historically. We need to focus on preserving access to low interest and tax exempt financing for all of our capital projects. We need to manage agreements effectively, particularly those ones that have capital sensitivities. And for us, that is the Army Corps of Engineers relationship around Howard Hanson Dam. And we need to continue to apply asset management principles that all together address sort of the cost side of the equation. But we also need to take a fresh look, I think, at demand management and transition towards thinking more dynamically with respect to conservation through programs that encourage conservation and pricing that encourage conservation. But we also need to think more flexibly about our market and how we define our wholesale supply arrangements, because water really, if you compare it to the power business, we don't have a very liquid market or fluid market. Stupid joke. So as I was saying before, we have to plan on horizons that really exceed our ability to see reliably into the future. And because of that, when we make decisions, we have to plan on uncertainty materializing and have a plan in place for when it does. And so going back to the chart that I showed you before with historical and forecasted demands, we're standing here today in 2014, once again forecasting demands well into the future, 60 years down the line. And all we really know is that we're going to get it wrong. Hopefully we're closer to getting it right, but we also know that with our surplus capacity, we have a significant amount of flexibility to sell into the wholesale market in creative new ways that are more flexible in terms of time horizon and pricing, that really allow us to deliver the value of our resource to our ratepayers. And that is going to be our focus going forward, part of our focus. And so as our industry adapts to what is a changing demand environment, it's our job as utility managers to think a bit more flexibly about conservation and a little bit more flexibly about how to develop markets for water supply and collaborate as an industry most effectively to utilize the value of the resource to our ratepayers. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for having us, and I'll be glad to answer questions once Ed has a chance to talk.
Thank you, Sean. Our last speaker, I don't think we've ever met before, Ed, but is Ed Sebron. Ed is an economist at Cascade Water Alliance and is commissioner for the Woodinville Water District. He's responsible for business analysis and forecasting of financials, rates, and demand, and he co-founded the FCS Group, a financial management consulting firm serving municipal utilities in the western U.S. He has 30 years' experience in financial planning with municipal utilities. Ed?
Thank you. Well, probably your first question is, okay, I heard Seattle, that's not Pierce County. Now I'm going to hear about the east side of Seattle, and that's not Pierce County. What I hope to do is help weave some of the pieces together as to how all of this does fit together, and even the actions of east side communities have an effect on water costs and economic development throughout the region. There we go. So just to give you some background, Cascade's a relatively new agency, and I'll kind of introduce you to who and what we are, and then kind of work through our development over the last 15 years of a supply strategy and what that's meant regionally in cooperation with some of our partners. We serve roughly the same number of people as Sean described for Tacoma, about 350,000 people, primarily east of Lake Washington, but also south. And we were formed in 1999, following about a decade-long process that Seattle and other communities, primarily in King County, held, wondering what to do about water. And if you go back to Bruce's graph, around 1990, supply and demand were about in balance, and there was a push towards what's the next generation of resource. Seattle was concluding that conservation was a linchpin of that, and the east side communities, which were growing very rapidly, were somewhat skeptical. Turns out Seattle was right, but the east side communities continued along a path where they wanted more control of their own destiny for their own economic development, and began to pursue an autonomous organization. By 1999, that had been created. Cascade's now 15 years old, has gone through a couple of supply planning cycles, and we are, in a sense, an experiment. We are experimenting with true marginal cost pricing, because the original model was we'd get off the regional system and build our own. So we would be the marginal source of supply at full marginal cost. And that had consequences. Give you kind of the picture that fits in with some of the earlier ones. We're primarily east of Lake Washington, as I mentioned. We have two members that are at the south end. Covington Water District, which borders Pierce County, had been a member. Frankly, this change in demand and change in supply situation has been so profound that where Covington believed they needed water from us within 20 years, they now believe they wouldn't need water from us within 100 years, and concluded that backing away was in their best interest. And we worked to an amicable separation of that relationship. We started out with a kind of a simple strategy. Seattle said, we'll supply you water to let you get on your feet, but we won't supply it for forever. We need it for our own growth. And so we had about 25 years to 2024 before the supply commitment from Seattle declined. We were at that same point in planning at that point that convinced us we were within a few years of actually being out of water, even with that block, and pursued other options. We looked at short-term options of buying more water from Seattle, buying water from Tacoma, and in fact acquired a capacity interest from Tacoma, spent about $25 million to secure a right to develop, once we developed a pipeline, to be supplied by them. Discovered it's not as easy to build a pipeline as one might think if you've never done it before, and went back to Seattle and bought an extra block of water from them. All of this was to provide us the time to build our next source. And for us, lake taps became that source. We purchased the lake from Puget Sound Energy. We purchased the hydroelectric water right, the diversion rights of up to, I believe, 2,000 cubic feet per second from the White River. We are in the unique situation of owning the lake, the water in it, and the land underneath it. as well as a municipal water right that we now hold with a 50-year development horizon for it. What that has proven to do is provide an insurance policy. We now can go to a Tacoma or a Seattle and say, sell us water while you have it, and when you no longer have it, we have our own source to turn to. And it's allowed us to pursue kind of regionally efficient approaches, kind of a synergy, if you will, or a conjunctive benefit of the systems to really optimize for everyone in the region when we build new supplies. Because quite frankly, as I've shared with our board on any number of occasions, if you look at the three major systems right now, Everett not being represented, we probably have enough surplus supply in those systems to build and supply another city of Seattle, maybe more. Given that, that means we have a lot of opportunity for growth. To have Cascade come along and say, we don't have supply, so we're going to build another major supply and dump it onto this market and compete with those other agencies would be a foolish use of public money, would be upward rate pressure for all of us. In 2006, we completed our first plan. Our demand forecast left something to be desired. It was an accumulation of the demand forecasts of our members. The first issue we faced was that we were off 30% in year zero, the year we were actually in. We couldn't foot to our current demands. So if you start 30% underwater, it's really tough to figure out a supply strategy that meets your needs. Out of that, even at that time, once a more reasonable demand forecast was established, which is that dark diagonal line, I was the financial consultant on the team and said, I will not give you a financial forecast premised on that. It's fiction. And we laid out a much more conservative financial forecast that became part of that first plan and on which all the finances were planned. It was still fairly robust. There was lots of growth to help pay for things. Rates were looking great for everyone involved. Our strategy, which all the colored boxes represent, was fairly complex. We had some independent supply. We had this block from Seattle going down. And then we were going to build Lake Tapps. And it went in two stages. You can see it lift again around 2035, where we'd have phase 2 developed. And by about 2050, we'd be out of water. Now, the next graph shows the update of that. It is exactly the same scale vertically. The timeline's a little different, but what you'll see is a very different picture of where reality has taken us. The black line on the left is our actual experience in Cascade's history of demands. The various lines leading off of that are our current forecasts of what we need. We've since negotiated an extension of supply from Seattle. It extends at current levels out to 2040, so we've gained 15 years there. We've renegotiated our supply relationship with Tacoma, and we now believe that given the contracts in place, it'll be the 2040s before we develop phase 1, and phase 2 will be sometime in the 2060s or 70s. That assumes that we can't continue to cooperate regionally and recognize that if we have water in existing resources, that that's the most efficient use of water supply. And our expectation is, to borrow a phrase from another economist, to try to walk the ridge line and at each point along the way assess whether we keep going down the same path or we deviate in one direction or the other. The ideal scenario for us will be to continue to extend contracts and purchase water from existing resources rather than bear that cost of a new resource. So we now have a supply scenario that's translated, as I'll get to in a second, to a very much improved financial scenario. Meanwhile, touching back to Bruce's comments about conservation, we've raised the same question, and what we've done now is we don't have any conservation program elements that can't survive a business case analysis. We have to do an analysis that proves that these are cost-effective investments compared to our alternatives. Much as Bruce demonstrated or shared with you in summary, that $70 million of conservation investment has saved hundreds of millions. For us, conservation that flattens that demand curve buys us more time and delays construction of a facility that right now would be in excess of $500 million. So there's a very real benefit to delaying that investment. Among other things, we have time to accumulate financial resources to pay for it. We have more customers on the system to bear the cost. And meanwhile, we're more efficiently using available resources that other agencies have already developed. We still have questions with this, and we have so much time available now. We're doing a lot of experimenting with our program. We have some features that are reorienting towards kind of building a synergy with our low-income assistance programs, where we go in and make conservation investments in conjunction with rate relief. So we kind of multiply the effect. You get a preferential rate, but we're also going to reduce your demand, which lowers your bill further, and we make the investment. Explore that as to whether those are cost-effective conservation investments for us. Even if not, as a pilot program, it has those other beneficial outcomes. So we're looking at several similar programs, some for new development as well. How can we help promote affordable housing? If we can create water efficiency angles that allow us to reduce the cost for new development if they're meeting those standards. So we've got time to experiment. And at the same time, we don't want to let go of the program because we believe there's a need for kind of an ongoing presence if you want conservation to be an ongoing part of your portfolio. So looking forward, we see probably lower levels of conservation investment, but continued levels so that we know what we have out there. Kind of the business case analysis revealed some interesting things to us. I have other slides that show every individual program element we considered for conservation, but when we assembled them into conservation programs, we found a few things. On the far left, if we were to execute our full conservation portfolio, we get a negative return on that investment. That's that blue line that points downwards. If we modify it so that we only do the most cost-effective of those at the same investment level as our current budget, we turn around and we're at about a 6%, which is the blue line in the center of the screen, blue bar in the center of the screen. And if we could get an extension of our contract with Seattle, which that helps facilitate because of the lower demand, we can push that up over 10%. If we reduce our spending to about half of our current level, we're cherry-picking the best conservation programs, and our yield return on investment reaches well over 10% or over 14% if we get that Seattle extension, which, by the way, we've since gotten. The interesting part of that was the last scenario, which was, okay, let's compare. Now I did half the budget. What kind of return do I get if I spend the other half of my budget? And once again, we have a negative return. That's that far right pair of bars. So there is a sweet spot. There's an appropriate amount of conservation investment in terms of business return, dollar-on-dollar return, that makes sense for us, and that's what we're now pursuing. Our conservation program has dropped about 40% in annual budgeted expenditures, but we expect the effectiveness in terms of return per dollar to be far greater than it would have been otherwise. And I can explore that later with you on the side because there's a lot of different facets to that we just don't have time to address here. So what does this all mean back at the bottom line, which is the bills our customers pay, the economic burden we impose on the region for access to water resources? Well, the blue line here was build our own supply and have it online in 2024. That vertical scale is hundreds of percent increase, not percent increase. We would have increased by more than a factor of 3 in a 10-year period if we were on track to develop lake taps in this time frame. At the same time, inflation would have gone up about 25%. So a massive economic impact. With the revised strategy and the ability to extend contracts, the ability to hold down demand, our cost profile is not only below inflation, it's below the combination of inflation and growth, to the point that, as Sean said, we all do our forecasts assuming that we're going to continue to have inflationary pressure in our costs. Our burden in the community to provide the same level of water supply service is going to be below inflation, and when you consider the growth in the customer base that's shared over, our rate impact is going to be our bill impact is going to be well below inflation. So that's great for Cascade, and what does it mean for Tacoma, Pierce County, King County in general? Well, we pay Tacoma $5 million a year right now, and we're partnered with them to help expand their wholesale relationships with neighboring communities. in part because that provides us the insurance policy that we know we don't run out of water, which is the other risk. As my boss likes to say, we're balancing two risks here. One's dollars and the other's gallons, and you don't want to run out of either, and you don't want too much pressure on either. We're promoting efficient use of existing resources. Take advantage of what's developed, what's in place, and before you build new infrastructure. With Lake Taps, we have kind of the insurance policy or the glue that holds it all together, because we have that in our hip pocket. Tacoma could sell us water secure in the knowledge that we have an alternate to go to when they need it back. Seattle the same, someday perhaps Everett the same, and it simply becomes a question of temporary use of capacity rather than a permanent burden on a system such as theirs that might ultimately prevent them from using it in some other advantageous fashion. Flexibility and adaptability. If you want a reliable system, you have a multiplicity of sources. I remember this from my generation planning in the electric industry. Have a lot of diverse sources of supply, and you have a more reliable system. And Lake Taps adds a different type of surface water supply into the mix. And finally, regional reliability. The way this all works long term is we start interconnecting our systems better, which means we have better backup and redundancy throughout. So looking forward, hopefully this is the water contribution to a more vibrant economic opportunity throughout our region. And that concludes my talk.